Hello everyone. This video is going to focus on strategies for developing a thesis statement. Keep in mind that part of the process of developing a thesis statement will include understanding how intro paragraphs work, as well as the scope of the essay, which also includes the rhetorical situation and understanding how to develop ideas for writing. Please be sure to review those videos prior to this one, otherwise it'll be a little more challenging in understanding how this all comes together and makes sense. Let's go ahead and get started. First, we start off with identifying what a thesis statement is. In many cases, we know the term, we've heard the term, but we often don't really know how to actually put it together. And again, as I stated before, it really requires us to engage in a much larger process that includes brainstorming, invention, and really reflecting out and fleshing out our ideas about what we want to actually write about when it comes to developing our essays. So first, the thesis statement does in fact tell the reader how you will interpret the significance of the subject matter under discussion. So I have stated before that we will view our essays as small conversations that we're having about a particular subject that relates back to a much larger topic. So in a way, we can see it as a three-tiered level approach. The topic is more general, the subject is specific aspects of that topic, and what you say about it, the thesis, is really the focus of the discussion. So when we read these thesis statements, we often get a general sense of what to expect in the actual essay itself, but moreover, it also lets us know what part of the conversation you're going to have about a particular topic. So in some sense, it also tells the reader what to expect for the rest of the essay. In other words, what you list out in the thesis statement is going to pretty much lay out what we can expect as far as information is concerned. In some cases, some essays will require background information, and we would know that depending on what you include in the thesis. In other cases, it does not. If we know that you're going to argue a particular point, there's a good chance that we should expect evidence and specific topic sentences that include claims. If we're not making that kind of an argument, then we would not expect it. So it really just depends and is controlled by you. In some aspects, we can determine that a thesis statement is an interpretation of the topic, not the topic itself, meaning this is your interpretation of how you understand the topic or subject matter. That would include your presenting your position about something, insight, and arguing about it, and understanding about it, taking a stance on it. It just really depends on how you're wanting to engage in this conversation, and that will stem back to developing your topics and ideas for topics for your essay. So in some sense, without doing that work, you cannot really develop a clear and strong thesis statement. Finally, a thesis statement is always arguable. In some aspects, students will use what's called purpose statements, which are things like, in this paper, I'm going to talk about. Well, we can't really argue that you're going to talk about it because you do. So those are really more purpose statements presenting what you're going to do, but we really don't need that because you're going to do it. The thesis statement, however, is something that is arguable, meaning that whatever you say in your paper, I should be able to turn around and argue back a point, or maybe specific points in your essay, not necessarily the entire thing. But as I indicated in the video about developing topics for ideas, is if you can get your audience to discuss and debate some of the points in your paper, then you are often on the right track. Okay, so where is the thesis placed in an essay and why? So let me take some time to talk a little bit about this, because students generally like to fill their thesis statement with background information about why they're writing about what they're writing about. So they might interpret a thesis statement to say something like, since the beginning of time, men and women have argued, and because they've argued about this, here's why I'm writing about it. Well, rely on your intro. When you review the introduction paragraph essay, you're going to come to understand how those will work simultaneously or along the same lines as a thesis statement. They rely on each other to make sense. So the thesis statement really should be the focal point. Here is what I'm arguing. That's what we're going to talk about here momentarily. So in many cases, the thesis statement is placed in the intro, and for the very reason that I just stated, is that the intro kind of contextualizes and gives us the purpose and reason as to why we got to this place. Okay, why are you getting to this place of why you're writing this topic or about this topic or arguing this point or whatever the case might be. So we're going to learn how to do that. So when you review the introduction paragraph video, it's going to make a lot more sense in that you'll understand how much more simplified the thesis statement actually is. Okay. Now, keep in mind that the thesis statement is only one sentence long, and understanding how sentences can be extended and created and punctuated to help extend those ideas in one sentence is going to be helpful. So we'll look at an example here momentarily. Okay. So how do I actually create the thesis statement? Okay, so again, going back to the process first, be sure that you are engaging in that lengthy thinking and brainstorming process. Review that video for more information. The other thing is that formulating a thesis right after you get the assignment is not something that's typical. So I can't stress this enough that the thesis statement is oftentimes much further down in the writing process. Generally, what we like to do is to gain background information. And as I indicate in the strategies for developing topics for writing video, it requires us to understand what's being talked about, what's being said, what do people understand, what are the people's attitudes and beliefs about it. So there's a lot more work that comes before you're actually developing the thesis, because once you do, that's really going to give us that knowledge nugget that I talk about as here's how I'm contributing to this conversation, and that's what's going to be indicated in the thesis statement. Once you do that, you also have to understand that this is still just a working thesis. Writing is not static. It's always evolving. Even if we're writing such a small essay, for instance, many of you are writing the 3 pages of an essay for English 101. And with that being said, we don't have much time or space, right? So we have to really pinpoint exactly what it is that we are going to write. And so usually, when we have a first draft or first round of a thesis statement, it's very broad. And what students come to find out is that they're trying to cover way too much. So this tends to be sort of our working thesis that gives us a sense of direction, and that's okay. Remember, that's the point of revising, is that we can go back and refine. And as I constantly say, it's easier to revise a one-sentence thesis statement than an entire paper to match a thesis that you refuse to change. So we always say is to be flexible. Just kind of remember that the thesis will often be finalized in its finest form during the revision stages, okay? So remember that the argument in the thesis will likely be adjusted along the way, and to remain open to that process. All right, so how do we create a thesis statement once we've done the work and we've done the process, okay? Well, I'd like to introduce the thesis statement as a formula. And you can see the formula right there where it says it's your topic plus your assertion, which gives you a thesis statement. I present it this way because the topic is broken down even further, and I'll address that here momentarily, and so is the assertion. And even though it seems pretty simple, topic plus assertion, there are a lot more factors that kind of go into each one of those. But if you can understand how each one of those plays a role in developing the thesis statement, every single time you will develop a strong thesis, okay? Now, in this concept of a formula, each aspect is going to indicate what kind of move that you need to do in the rest of your essay. So earlier I stated that sometimes we have to have background information, or sometimes we need to clarify things, or sometimes we need to define things. It really depends on the type of information we include in our thesis statement, which is why it's so imperative that we are very strict with what we include in our thesis statement. So For those of us who kind of throw in random words in there, or buffer words, or filler statements, well, those filler statements might seemingly be innocent, but they can point to a specific meaning in relation to something you're saying in the thesis that will require you to do a specific move in your essay, and you here thinking that it's just a filler statement, well, you might be leaving specific information out. So let's look at what I mean by this, and we're going to kind of break down each aspect of this, okay? So first, I indicated that the formula is topic plus assertion. So let's look at the topic part first. So the topic should be the specific subject of focus, okay? So when I say topic, as you can see, I have the example social media. Well, social media is such a broad topic. So when students tell me, I'm going to write about social media, well, that's the first step. But what they're really trying to say, or what you really should be doing, is what aspects of social media are you going to be talking about? And so when we use the term subject, that really begins the process of narrowing our focus about developing our thesis statement. So with that being said, the type of information you include about the topic is going to start the process of here's what I need in my essay. So let's look at this here. So we have topic, which is social media, which naturally the term will be found in there somewhere because we know that that has to be addressed. But to narrow the focus to actually write our thesis statement, we can't just say social media is this or social media is that, because there are many elements and layers to it. But what we can do by refining it is, I observed, if you recall from the developing topics for ideas, this is a real situation where the other day I was on or noticed or made the observation that Khloe Kardashian on her Instagram page marketed an advertisement for a pharmaceutical drug. This was the first time I had ever seen pharmaceutical drugs being advertised in social media platforms. And more specifically, it was something that I observed that was being marketed by an influencer such as herself. Now, for me, as I indicated about observations, is noted my reaction. Why did I react to such an advertisement? And for me, I wanted to mark those down. It was surprising. I hadn't seen it before. And then I started making connections about where I have seen pharmaceutical advertisements, which is television, and magazines, right? Well, now that television commercials and magazines are starting to become obsolete, I started making connections that, well, most people's time are now being spent on social media. So after brainstorming and thinking about this is something that I think I want to pursue. So I would start, my subject would be, okay, advertising pharmaceutical drugs on social media. This is what my focus is going to be about. In the larger conversation that's social media, I want to talk about specifically advertising pharmaceutical drugs, okay? So that's our topic. That's our one position. So now I need to get to my assertion. So after my exploration, the question asking, and really kind of figuring out what it is that I have to say about all this, now I will continue in developing my thesis, which now comes, as you can see, the words that come after this are going to be so critical to what your paper is going to look like. And again, it really requires you to understand, well, what's your purpose for the essay? What's your job? What do you need to achieve? And depending on what that includes, that's going to also be a key player in how and what you say after the actual topic itself. So let's go on. So we have our subject, so we narrowed it down further. And what we say about this after is, again, thinking about the how and why. The how and why should always sort of be present, or at least hovering, and getting a sense of why we're even having this conversation, as always, because we always want to answer the question, why does this matter? It's also going to depend on the purpose. And based off that, we're going to turn to verbs and phrases. So many of us know that verbs are action concepts, but for every type of verb you use, it's going to point to a certain action that's going to take place in the essay itself. So we know that everything in the thesis needs to be arguable. So we start with the concept of argument. But how can we argue things, right? We can argue things in many ways. We can argue a definition. We can argue a process. We can argue what something is like. We can argue what something is not like, the cause, the effect. So we're not just going to argue something. We have to be focused on what we do. So this is just a small list, and there are many more things that you can argue. But with this list, so if I want to define, or if I want to take a stance or address an issue, I'm going to turn to words like these to help me convey that idea in my actual thesis statement. Okay, so you'll want to utilize either a thesaurus, utilize wordhippo.com, which is always one of my favorites and helpful. And you'll want to consider, okay, if I know that I use these words, then I'm telling my reader this is what I'm trying to do in my essay. I'm trying to redefine something or challenge a notion or address what is the cause or effect. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue and examine this here. We are continuing on with, we already established our topic, but now we want to add our assertion, okay? So what I did here is I used the word is, and is a very powerful word. Even though it's small, it's mighty, which means in many cases when we use the word is, it sort of acts as an equal sign. So on the left, we have what we're talking about, and on the right of what comes after is what we're saying it's equal to, or what its cause or the effect, depending on how we're making our statement. So we have advertising pharmaceutical drugs on social media is unethical due to its easy exposure to younger demographics. Okay. Now I have a thesis statement here, but once we start breaking it down, we'll slowly start to realize the different moves we need to make or information we need to cover in our essay. So let's go ahead and look at that breakdown. In the red, we have advertising pharmaceutical drugs. Okay. I need to define or indicate somewhere in my essay what that means and what that looks like, and that's going to stem from my observation. Okay, so that's going to display your knowledge as well. So at some point in the essay, usually in the beginning, you're going to indicate what this is. Okay. Then you're going to add on social media. So this is going to help you focus your essay on social media platforms only. Now, if you want to be more specific, you can say on Instagram or Twitter or whatever. So that's for you to decide depending on what area you want to focus on. And again, this is helpful in narrowing your ideas. Once we have the word is, we are now making our statement. This is what's making it arguable. And we've used the term unethical. So now that I said is unethical in my body paragraph, I'm going to need to get into that. At some point, I need to talk about how this is unethical and my position about it being unethical. This is also going to display my understanding of what my concept of ethics is as it relates to, and again, we're always thinking about relationships to, the concept of advertising pharmaceutical drugs. And then we have due to, okay? So this is going to show a connection to what causes this. So in some aspects, this thesis is doing two things. One, giving my position about it, but also addressing what's the cause of this factor. So that's going to be its easy exposure to younger demographics. Now, we have a pretty solid thesis statement here, but we can actually enhance it and make it better if we want to, or simply just to expand. If I have a much larger essay or page requirements, then I can add to this, right? So let's look at how we can actually extend those ideas. So if I say, since younger people have easy access to social media platforms, now I need to explain what I mean. And since I use the word since or while, or even though, those are going to be helpful sometimes, because then we can start off with, all right, now my first order of business in my essay is to address why people have easy access to social media. This is going to be important because it's going to connect to my argument later on down the road in my thesis statement, right? About why it's a problem or why it's unethical. Then I have my subject, advertising pharmaceutical drugs on social media. And then I added using celebrity icons. So I want to focus specifically on celebrity icons who use their platform in order to advertise, because then it's going to help me give me specific examples, right? As I said, I used Khloe Kardashian before, but now I can find different examples of people who might be influential to the younger demographics that I'm talking about. So as I said in the Developing Topics for Ideas video, what you include here is going to dictate your language, your evidence, your examples, any analogies that you might give. So all that should be there. So then I have is unethical due to it's easy, and then we added influential exposure to younger demographics. And now I want to give more of my argument, who are more likely to be influenced because of the value placed on celebrity culture. So that kind of gives my position and my attitudes and beliefs about it, right? I talked about that before, why it's so important to brainstorm, because then it gives us where we stand on something, and then we can include that in our thesis statement naturally. Now, as I said before, these things will evolve. We may find that I don't have enough celebrity icons to turn to, so maybe I can scale it back and not use celebrity icons and just talk about the general advertisement. So it really just depends on what direction you're in control. But as I said before, it's easier to change up one sentence and a few words to match what you have in your paper versus changing everything in an entire paper to match a thesis statement, okay? So finally, just a few reminders and points to remember. As I indicated, thesis statements are always changing, so it's easier to change one sentence. Everything included in thesis statements needs to be addressed in the essay. So when I review a thesis statement, I ensure that all parts, every single word, is accounted for in the body paragraphs, okay? It should also reflect the purpose of the essay as well as your point for having this conversation. And that should be clear, like the so what, why does it matter, right? That will be kind of refined after you've written the essay. At the very beginning, most people like to write the intro and thesis right off the bat, and you don't really have your ideas together. So be sure that you're going back and revising that, so that way we can see what the purpose is later on. Finally, words matter. Every word you include will reflect a specific mood needed. Be careful for those filler statements that you might have in there. You might say something like, people are problematic. When it comes to people and pharmaceutical drugs, well, we can say people, but that's general, right? People could be, are you talking about adolescents? Are you talking about, young adults, children? We have all kinds of classifications of people. So again, you are in control to scale it much larger or to control it into more specificity. And usually I always encourage students to err on the side of specificity as well. So when we go through this process of developing our drafts and essays, I will be highlighting aspects of your thesis that will need to be enhanced, or need to be revised in order to make sure that it reflects the paper that you are writing. So please be sure to review this concept and really be mindful as you are engaging in the writing process. I know that a lot of times when we start to actually write, we kind of forget some of these tips and strategies. But if you are ignoring them and not really applying these as you write and kind of doing the trial and error concept, then you're never really going to master the development of a thesis statement, okay? If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, or if you're unsure how to approach this, or perhaps maybe you want to send a thesis statement my way to review before writing, you're always welcome to do so, and just send me an email with your sample and I can give you feedback on it, okay? Be sure to watch some of the other videos that I indicated throughout this one in order to understand how it all works together and engage in the process of developing your ideas.